Welcome to another episode of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast, a special midterm edition. I'm your host today, Andrea Christianson, a partner at Penta. Joining me to discuss Tuesday's election results are Penta senior partner and former senior advisor to National Republicans, Kevin Madden, and managing director and former press secretary to First Lady Jill Biden, Michael LaRosa. Kevin and Michael, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here.
Truthfully, I have not slept yet.
Well, then let's get started.
He's going to be real clear-eyed in his assessment.
All good.
So we still don't know exactly where the chips are going to fall. There was not a red wave, but Republicans are still expected to take the House, and the Senate could again rest on a Georgia runoff. For me, I see the split ticket voting and the underperformance of a lot of Trump-endorsed candidates as an indicator of two things: that the quality of the candidate still matters and that voters are smarter than a lot of people give them credit for. And so to get us started, what are some of the top takeaways that you have from last night's vote about how is the average American thinking about choosing their elected officials? So Kevin, let's start with you.
Well, I think it's pretty straightforward. If you're going to wake up and assess, well, what just happened, a very divided American electorate delivered a very divided political judgment. They are, if you look at any of the polls with anxiety about the economy, anxiety about rising crime, anxiety about the right track, wrong track of the direction of the country. By any of those measures, people were not very happy, and they wanted a shift by the Biden administration. And they were judging the Biden administration somewhat harshly, but not harsh enough to really hand over the keys to the car to Republicans in a very emphatic way, right? Or a very conclusive way. So we have what I think what the American people voted for, which is you're essentially going to have political gridlock with the balance of power in the United States operating between essentially the 45-yard lines of American politics.
Michael, political gridlock. You agree with that?
Yes, I do. I think there's going to be political gridlock. I think President Biden's agenda comes to a screeching halt. I think that we will have to start taking one lesson I learned from last night is that we have to start taking the early vote more as a factor into how we are going to start either predicting or talking about like the conclusion of these elections, because I was really baffled by reporters over the last 2 weeks talking about the election as if, Democrats were not going to turn out. There was no enthusiasm. This was going to be another 10 or 14. And I just didn't understand it. And I said, are you just looking at the polling? I mean, why wasn't anybody looking at the actual hard numbers of people who had already voted? Because if you look at all of the voting that had taken place, including the performance by in the House specials over the summer that where the Democrats outperformed Biden, and if you look at the Dobbs decision and voter registration, and Democratic candidates outraising Republican candidates, all of the actual numbers and data just showed that there was only intensity on one side, and it was never really on the Republican side, other than maybe polls, but they were so abstract until you actually saw the voting begin. So I guess that's one of my biggest takeaways, is that the electorate is now voting by mail or in person early more than it ever has before.
That's a really interesting takeaway. And I kind of want to push a little bit more on the split ticket piece, because we saw it in New Hampshire, we saw it in Kansas, in Ohio, in Georgia, and Brian Kemp won pretty handily, and we still don't know the outcome of the Senate race. And so Herschel Walker is a Trump-endorsed candidate. Brian Kemp went head-to-head with Trump. So what does this mean for how we think about voters making decisions going forward? And I think the early vote does play into that.
Well, I think the split decisions and the split ticket phenomenon is largely rooted in the fact that you take these swing areas of each one of these states, and it really comes down to the suburbs. And you had candidates that lost because they were essentially toxic in the suburbs. They were toxic with voters that are perfectly fine with crossing over and voting for somebody not in their tribe, either a Democrat or Republican, who just talks directly to the issues that matter to them most. And the issues that matter to people the most this time were the economy, inflation, rising prices, right? A looming recession, increases in crime. And then in many of these swing areas where suburbans matter and Republican moderate women matter, the abortion issue was also a driver of their vote and why they found some candidates too far to the extreme. And so the backdrop of the abortion issue did actually make a difference in many of these suburbs, and it made a difference in why you saw this dislocation oftentimes from gubernatorial races and Senate races.
Yeah, and Michael, I want to bring it back to you because you mentioned that the Democratic base was a bit more energized than polls gave them credit for. But I want to ask a question about the base because it seems like these races are being decided on the margins here, not by the base.
The big middle.
Yeah. And so I feel like both parties talk about base turnout, but what they really need to be spending their time on is the middle. Is that kind of what your view is, Michael?
I think so. And Democrats won independents last night by 2 points. And that's the third election in a row that they have. So I believe that they are targeting independents. But I do think that what Dobbs did, and frankly, I think there were two unforeseen events that sort of changed the contours of this midterm from a traditional midterm by historic standards versus like a 1998 or a 2002. And it's external factors. And one of them was Dobbs, because I think what it did was it at least brought both parties' intensity and enthusiasm back to an even playing field. And then I think the reemergence of the former president, who just polls terribly with independents from normal polling to last night's exit polls. Independents just are turned off by the guy and are reminded every time he is sent in front of the camera of why they didn't vote for him last time. And there's a media addiction to him. And so long as that is still the case, which it doesn't seem like it's going away, I think that's a really big problem for Republicans because of the independents specifically are just turned off by him. And these candidates that he crowned, the entire time when I left the White House in August, I started paying attention a lot more closely. And one thing I noticed from August on was all of the Senate candidates, the Republicans, had consistently higher unfavorable likability numbers than their Democratic rivals. And those Democratic candidates all had more popular ratings than President Biden.
Well, and your observation is definitely correct because Republicans are expected to have a much narrower than anticipated majority in the House of Representatives, and control of the Senate is still up in the air. So Kevin, what does this mean for a likely future Speaker McCarthy and the Republican agenda?
Well, a lot of that depends on how they interpret what happened on Tuesday night, and that's one of the interesting things about internal party politics is Republicans won a political majority. They're going to control the House of Representatives. But a political majority and a governing majority are two very different things. So they may have the numbers to get all the spoils of a majority, right? Which is Speaker McCarthy is going to have a title. He's going to have a much bigger office, and they're going to have Republican House members with gavels. And they're going to be able to control the agenda to a certain extent, but they do not have the numbers in order to really drive and marshal big national consensus and party unity around big initiatives. So I think, again, going back to my earlier observation, which is we're looking at a lot of gridlock. We're going to see the Congress in Washington operating within these 45-yard line, the 45-yard lines of American politics. And the other interesting factor is there's always a tendency for the most active base voices inside a party to misinterpret political mandate. So we have the majority, and the reason we didn't have a bigger majority, many of these insurgents are going to say, is because we weren't conservative enough. We didn't run hard enough. We didn't drive hard enough on our opposition to the Biden agenda. And so one of the big pressures right now is going to be preventing Republicans from overreaching. And so they're going to want to take these gavels, and they're going to want to have an agenda that's driven by oversight and investigations, when what's really driving the American electorate's psyche right now is concerns about the economy, concerns about kitchen table issues, issues that need legislative reforms or comprehensive blueprints on policy. And so the big canyon right now is how prepared the Republicans are to do that when they're going to be driven by a very loud activist faction inside their conference.
Do you think that the reality of Trump-supported candidates underperforming gives a Speaker McCarthy an opportunity to sort of focus on these more kitchen table issues and sort of tamp down some of that insurgent voice?
It should. And one of the ways that he may do that is he may let that faction inside his conference touch the stove, burn their fingers, and learn the hard way. And it may be one of but that's not exactly very orderly. That's not an orderly process. That kind of friction inside a party means that it's not going to be as easy to develop a cohesive agenda. And if you look at the commitment to America that they outlined, that the House Republicans outlined during the election season, it's pretty vague. And it says things like, we're going to tackle inflation. We're going to, conduct accountability and oversight. And we're going to do more. We're going to explore more domestic production on drilling and things like that. So those are big issues that they, may have some unity on. But there's probably going to be a lot of fighting and internal conflict when it comes to things like funding our allies in Ukraine. And so those flashpoints and flashpoints around other issues where the Republicans want to be much more aggressive in investigating or confronting the Biden administration, those will be tough challenges to manage.
Thanks. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to talk about the next election on everyone's mind, 2024.
Every 2 weeks, Penta measures U.S. adults' feelings and expectations toward the economy. The Civic Science Economic Sentiment Index, powered by Penta, accurately measures movements in overall national economic sentiment and provides a more sophisticated alternative to existing economic sentiment indices. To learn more, contact us at pentagroup.co.
Welcome back to our special midterm edition of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. I'm Andrea Christianson, and I'm here with Kevin Madden and Michael LaRosa, breaking down what we know about Tuesday's election results and what they mean for future elections. So speaking of future elections, Governor Ron DeSantis overperformed, Trump-endorsed candidates underperformed, Biden overperformed, but is still unpopular. So what does this tell us about the 2024 race that essentially starts today? Michael, let's start with you.
I think that the president is going to view last night, whether he should or not. I think the White House and the president are going to view last night as a validation of his policies and of his agenda. In their eyes, Democrats embraced his agenda, even if they didn't embrace him physically. They embraced the things that he is talking about, and the sort of laundry list of accomplishments domestically that he was able to get through. So I think Kevin's right. I think he's going to be emboldened, and I think this will make him want to run even more. I think he will end up running ultimately, but I think this only reinforces that he probably will.
So I think that's right. That if you're down at the White House right now, you feel a sense of reprieve, and but I think the mistake here is overreading what happened last night, and thinking that you should be emboldened. Where I disagree with Michael is the idea that his agenda was embraced. If you look at any of the exit polls, the president still has very low approval rating. People still feel like the country's on the wrong track, and they feel like many of the policies that he's promoting are hurting the country. And on the biggest ones, the economy, inflation, gas prices, crime, voters said that they were more likely to support Republicans and thought Republicans had a better plan on that. So it was a bit of a reprieve, but you have to make sure that you recognize that, okay, you got another chance at this. They're not willing to give over the government wholesale control to the Republicans. And so we've got to find a way to revamp our message, revamp our strategy, possibly temper our domestic and international agenda, and do a better job of focusing on the big middle of the American electorate, again, at a time where voters essentially said we're divided and we want everybody to operate within the 45-yard lines of American politics.
Yeah, exactly. So go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
No, I was going to agree with what Kevin said, because I think people are feeling real financial pain, and I think the exit polls captured all of that. And one of the lessons I keep relearning, and you may or may not agree, but when we talk about pocketbook issues or issues that matter, that people can feel, I question whether that matters less than sort of cult of personality in politics generally, because of all those things that Kevin listed based off of the exit polls and the president's performance and approval rating. People, despite all that pain, they still weren't able in some cases to vote for, to punish him. Their dislike for Republican candidates was stronger than how they feel about paying for gas prices or inflation. So that begs the question, and I don't know the answer, but is candidate quality actually the biggest driver when you have a binary choice between two people? Is politics more personality driven? Does messaging actually really matter when you have a choice between two people? I think in college, when John Kerry was running against George W. Bush, Ohio had one of the worst unemployment rates in the country. And I thought, there's no way that the American people would support, or Ohio would reelect George W. Bush. But people could relate to him. They did not like John Kerry.
Not to age anybody here, but while you were in college on that campaign, I was actually working on it, Michael. And you know what state I was tasked with winning?
Ohio.
The state of Ohio. So let me tell you. And this is a really good example, because it sort of offers us a glimpse into how these how the issues are debated and how attributes matter, right? And how candidates talk about those and how they understand the problems of the average voter, and then how they articulate the vision for the future. And in that race, John Kerry was talking about some higher taxes, and he was talking about, possibly different trade policies, and he was talking about he was also talking about national security in a different way than George W. Bush was. So it was a very clear contrast between the candidates. And the candidate that won was the candidate that was more optimistic about the future and was more focused on how we could put more of an emphasis back on commerce and economic activity. And so it was a very close race. It only came down to 70,000 votes in that state, but 70,000 votes was the difference between whether or not John Kerry was president. So I think that's one of the lessons that Biden has to recognize, is that he has to have a message that is now that does a better job of talking to the people who feel that the White House is out of touch on spending, that the White House is out of touch on taxes, that the White House is out of touch on how it approaches issues like energy exploration, gas prices, and inflation. So. Like I said, there was no really clear-cut message as far as an electoral mandate out of Tuesday's results. But if you're down at the White House, you got to say, okay, we got a reprieve. What do we do to retool our message and do a better job ahead of 2024?
And that's interesting, because I think what I've heard from them is that they feel their message, democracy on the ballot, they feel that message worked. I don't know if that worked or not.
The numbers say it did not. The numbers say that democracy at stake did not matter with the voters who made the difference in this election.
But I do think, to your point, voters are less willing to vote for a bad candidate on the margin. And I think that does matter. And so I want to bring it back to 2024 and we're thinking about candidates. I mean, Trump's got a planned rally coming up where everyone's expecting him to announce for 24. Apparently, he wasn't quite happy with last night, and he shouldn't be happy with last night. I don't think that changes anything. But Kevin, I mean, Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, who wins in a primary?
Well, that's an entire podcast on its own.
Well, I'm looking for an answer.
Let me put it this way. Donald Trump has a very firm grip on the Republican Party and the Republican Party base activists that shows up in primaries and votes. He has a looser grip than he had on Monday. And he also has a looser grip than he did in 2020 and then in 2016. So there's an opportunity out there for somebody to take Trump on and possibly beat him in a primary. It's a very slim opportunity because no one has yet demonstrated that they're willing to confront Donald Trump and run the type of campaign that would confuse or fluster Donald Trump, in that Donald Trump is always on offense. He's always framing the debate on his terms, and he is relentless in attacking his opponents and relentless in how he activates his base voters. So Ron DeSantis' 20-point win, I think it's close to 20 points, right? I forget what the numbers are, but it was looking like a very sizable win, and he was winning amongst demographics that don't necessarily, or in the past hadn't necessarily been strong Republican voters. And he has offered a template for national Republicans on how you can run a race and win over crossover votes and dominate in a battleground state. That is increasingly turning red, by the way. Florida's looking more and more like South Carolina every time we have an election. So there's an opportunity there. But the question is, can he run that same race every single day, 3 times a day for 2 years against Donald Trump? And that we don't know.
Time will tell. And Michael, you said that you think Biden's going to run again in 2024. I won't put you on the spot and ask if you think he should, but who might be other viable candidates should he choose not to run?
Probably Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg. Not that I would support either one of them, but those are 2 people that I think would certainly get in, along with the vice president. And then I think you'd have to look at some governors like Gavin Newsom and Jared Polis, now Gretchen Whitmer. I think people are going to start talking about those kinds of people. I have no insight into whether they are planning it, but it seems like those are the kind of people that they would, that the kind of elected officials that would want to explore it. But I do think Biden's going to run.
I think it's very hard to see how Biden doesn't run now. If we saw a much different judgment, if we saw the red wave that everybody expected, the pressure would have mounted every single day from today all the way through the beginning of the year for Biden to step aside and let new leadership take over inside the Democratic Party. But with this, the reprieve, I think they have to feel emboldened, and they are going to march ahead with an announcement probably early in the year, because we know Donald Trump is going to announce before the end of the year. And the Trump effect, back in full effect.
Well, it seems like we'll have an interesting 2 years ahead of us. Kevin, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for listening to this edition of What's at Stake, a Penta podcast. Tune in next week and visit us at pentagroup.co to learn more. Thank you.